stick figure guy?
Yeah, what's he doing?
He's pondering. He's trying to no. Well, maybe. Could be.
Jesus picture. I don't know what that's actually called because mystery is always going to
We refer to it as the whale on the Morpheus watches books. Couple things here. Book gets published 1922. Okay, so Hermann Hesse is a German author. We'll probably get into him a little bit more so tomorrow. But your book is going back several hundreds of years, back to roughly 500 BCE, before Common Era. When the book first came out, you had a lot of literary critics not reading the book, writing about it. Kind of like how some people do essays, where they were talking about what a wonderful biography is about the Buddha. It's not a biography about the Buddha. It's not a biography about the Buddha. It's not a biography about the Buddha. The Buddha's name is Siddhartha. Your main character's name is Siddhartha. It's not a biography about the Buddha. But just to confuse Heath a little bit, the Buddha will show up. So Siddhartha will have a conversation with Siddhartha. Yep. He appears. Not like magic.
Well, I guess it was 500 BC.
Yeah. Correct. Now, Buddha Siddhartha is referred to as like the Buddha or the illustrious one, so it's not going to be Siddhartha said to Siddhartha kind of thing. But Siddhartha is not an uncommon name, so it would be Alex meets some other famous Alex kind of person, and they have a conversation. It's allowed. Or it could be like you in third period or second period, or whatever period that class is. When we have Josh, and Josh. You are going to have a little bit of a combination of religions and cultures kind of coming together. Josh already identified what he referred to as the Jesus fish, so symbol of Christianity. The wheel of life here is traditional symbol for Buddhism, and then also you have this symbol, which a lot of people get tattooed and don't know what it means, which is the symbol for Hinduism. So these three ideas are kind of get melded together. By no means you don't have nearly, I would say, the amount of symbolic religious illusions as you did in Cuckoo's Nest. So it's okay if you're still kind of iffy on a lot of the tenets of the cultures and religions. You'll still be able to make sense of what's going on throughout the course of the book. But today we'll give you some background with Hinduism, Buddhism in general, just so you have a better idea of what's going to be going on. This means Om. I see 30, but Om. So when you meditate, Heath, this is what you want to get to. Om. You cannot meditate while playing video games. It has to be a totally separate thing.
No, you can do so.
No, not gonna work. I made the mistake of asking Sam what he knew about Hinduism, and then we got a big long ramble of nothing.
Really? He didn't say anything.
He asked some good questions.
What did he say?
What do you know about Hinduism? Not much. For today, giving you a little bit of background as to viewpoints and origins of Hinduism and Buddhism, since they're going to be a big part of the book. One thing that gets tough for a lot of people to understand when it comes to Hinduism, and I'll smooth that so that we can see it a little bit easier. Hinduism, we tend to look at it as, okay, it's a major religion throughout the course of the world. When you go strictly by numbers, it would be the third most popular or followed religion after Christianity and Islam. About 15 to 16% of world population would be Hindu. Majority of Hindus live in India, but certainly it springs out into other places as well. And that's also where you kind of start to have the birthplace of Buddhism. A lot of folks have questions when we kind of go over stuff with Hinduism. Feel free to ask them. I'll try to give you answers as best I can. If I don't know, I'll simply say, I don't know, which will probably happen a fair amount of the time. What makes it difficult, I think, for a lot of Western cultures to kind of understand Hinduism is if you are Hindu, you don't necessarily think of it as being it is a religion that I follow, but it's like a way of life. The word that they use, it's called Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, which basically means culture, way of life, not necessarily religion, but more encompassing than that. there is not a single starting point for Hinduism. So that we can't go, it originated in the year 1500 BCE, when so-and-so started doing this. We don't know the origins of it. The term Hindu itself can just be geographical. People who live by the Indus River are referred to as being Hindu. And then as Western cultures started kind of taking a look at it, 18th, 19th century is when people just started going, oh, they're Hindus, they practice the same religion. You could be a Hindu, you could have another person be a Hindu, you could have a third person be a Hindu, and your religious beliefs could certainly still vary from person to person. There is not one supreme God. There's not a list of deities that all Hindus pray to. Some Hindus believe that there is one God. Some Hindus believe that there are multiple gods. Some Hindus believe that there are hundreds upon thousands of gods. Some Hindus don't really think that God exists anymore, that God created the world, the universe, the cosmos, and then after that kind of disappeared. So to say that this is what all Hindus believe is not going to happen. If you were to take a list of all deities that various Hindus would pray to, you would have a list of over 300,000. Now, that's not to say that there's a single person who worships 300,000 different gods, but it's just the various incarnations or kind of forms of God that can take place. So that kind of gets tougher for people to think about. Think of more of Hinduism as simply a way of life, and as with any other kind of religion, culture, it preaches a lot of the same things. Be peaceful, be nice, don't hurt other people, that most religions, follow and believe in. But it is certainly primarily within the Indian area, subcontinent that you're taking a look at. Life is eternal. The soul does not die, the vessel does. So when Grant's days come to an end, we will shed a tear, but we're not going to be completely upset because his soul will continue in some form, some shape. Could be another human, could be other kind of vessel that would take place. But basically, people are in this cycle of life, and the hope is that you can remove yourself from the cycle and find enlightenment, peace, happiness beyond that incarnation that keeps happening over and over and over again. So sure, Jesse could be a turtle in the grapes of wrath, and then you could become a human, and then you could become a fish. You could be a person the whole time through. You could have parallel universes where you could be a different form of a Jesse in some other place, which would be really confusing.
Can you be an enlightened fish? Like, do you have to be in a human form to become enlightened?
Good question. If to truly be enlightened, and this is where you start to get a shift from Hindu to Buddhism. To truly be enlightened, you kind of go beyond the realm of human body vessels. So if Megan's Hindu, she is not enlightened because she's still in this body form. Buddhists do not believe in gods. Buddhists still do believe in the whole cycle, but a Buddhist would argue that you could reach that form of enlightenment outside while still being human, or being whatever other vessels might happen. So the original Buddha is no longer alive in his human form, but his soul would still exist to be enlightened, whether it's a river, a fish, a piece of grass. Some could argue rocks. So what it means to be living isn't necessarily biological. You have to have cells and all that kind of stuff. It could be objects that we wouldn't consider to be alive, necessarily.
I also
No,
forgot to ask before. So would a religious identity be separate? Like not entirely, but would it? Did people still classify themselves as separate religions? Because I know they're like a bunch of these.
Like for multiple Hindus?
Yeah. Like any person. Like could any person be any religion and still be Hindu?
You know, in the sense that you wouldn't be a Christian Hindu or a Jewish Hindu, necessarily, but certainly, it tends to be more geographical, where each culture could have differing beliefs. They would all be fairly similar, but there could be certain, I don't know if sects would be the right word to use, but there would be certain groupings. It wouldn't necessarily be a change in the belief of values, or in the whole reincarnation idea. It would be more of the deities that you would be praying to, if any at all. But so far as common bonds, regardless of where you're at, you would hold the Vedas, which we're going to get into here. So they're like hymns, poems. You would look at those as being sacred no matter what. You would be looking at, this whole idea about the beauty of nature being an illusion, which is term number 6 on your little sheet, Maya, where what you see is not on it, isn't the realness that you're looking for. You're trying to transcend beyond that. So those things would be certainly similar with it, but different places could be considered sacred. What animal do Hindus generally look at as being sacred? Cows. That can vary a little bit, but that tends to be pretty predominant. But it would be more like kind of who you pray to, more than anything else. Catholics pray to a lot of saints. Protestants generally don't pray to a lot of saints. Catholics will communicate with the priest in order to talk to God. Most Protestants won't. So, those are certainly variations that exist within Christianity. Obviously, variations, within Judaism. But the gods themselves would be different, which for us is mind-blowing. How can Medina be a Hindu, and Jesse be a Hindu, and me be a Hindu, but pray to different gods? Because, well, that doesn't work that way. That's where it becomes different. But I think that idea of it being a total way of life, culture, it's different than saying, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, I'm Lutheran, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim. But a lot of the things, prayer, sacrifice, pilgrimages to sacred places, bathing in sacred rivers, that tends to be pretty predominant of any culture, of any kind of religion. No, we might not be doing sacrifices now, but if you look throughout, history of most religions, is sacrifice there, certainly. Bathing in sacred rivers, baptism, things like that. So a lot of the things that happen in most cultures, religions, would be the same thing when it comes to Hinduism. The terms that we're going to take a look at here, we got the Vedas, we got Brahmanism, the Upanishads, then Buddhism is really what we're going to try to start and take care of today. The Vedas. Vedas is an ancient group of prayer and hymns. This would kind of be the basis of the Hindu culture. What is kind of difficult about them is we don't know exactly where they came from and when. We know they date back to around 1500 BCE, would have been more verbal at that point as opposed to being written down. But one theory suggests that it goes back that far, so you're talking, 3,500 years ago to the Aryans. Aryans has nothing to do with Hitler's talk of an Aryan race of blonde, blue eye, and all that kind of stuff. Aryans is another term that gets used for the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans, you're taking a look at like Iran, so far as where those folks would be. So you have a great migration that's taking place around this time, and some people feel that that is where the Vedas and the origins of Hinduism are kind of coming from. It's a theory, it's not known for sure, but you have a big migration that's happening to the Indian subcontinent at that point. Some folks don't like that idea, because if you're a practicing Hindu, and your family, your culture is indigenous to India, you probably don't like the idea that an outsider could be bringing in a pretty important culture or religion to your area. So some folks argue that it is indigenous to the people of India, but basically no one knows for sure. But from like 12 BCE, 1100 BCE is when you start getting more print versions of the Vedas starting to take place. And this is when you kind of start to get a little bit more uniform Hindu beliefs happening as you get more people migrating from various places. The breadbasket, so to speak, of the Hindu religion culture would be the Indus River in India. And to be Hindu meant at one time that you lived by the Indus River. So you're Alleghenians because you live by the Allegheny. It's easier to say than calling you a Mongolian. Well, that could be like a Mongolian. That just doesn't sound fun, you Ohioan person. Caste system is a big part of Hindu culture. So it breaks down into various categories, and you'll get different names that kind of get used, but basically it goes into these 5 categories. You have the Brahmins, you have the nobles, the merchants, the servants, and then the untouchables, the lowest of the low. You're born into a caste system, that is where you stay. That does not mean, and I'll zoom in on this part here and then I'll come back to it. This does not mean that necessarily the Brahmins are the wealthiest people and the untouchables are the poorest. Generally, the untouchables are the poorest. But you could have nobles or merchants who make more money than the Brahmins. The nobles would tend to be the government kind of leaders. The Brahmins are the group of people who can become priests and guard those traditions or teach about the rights and principles of Hinduism. So Siddhartha, our title character, is a Brahmin. He is meant to grow up to become a priest. But it's not a guarantee that he will be a priest, but he is like eligible to be a priest. So when you graduate from high school, you are eligible to go to college. It's not a guarantee that Grant will go to college. We think Grant will go to college, but we don't. So in the book, Siddhartha will talk about he passes a poor Brahmin. That wouldn't be completely unusual. You could be a farmer and be born into the Brahmin caste. You could be a sharecropper, you could be a merchant. It just means you're eligible to become a teacher. But it's not a guarantee that that would be the case. But if you're a nobleman, your kids will continue to be nobles. You'll have political power. Could be warriors as well, military power. Merchants are going to be those who, obviously involved with economy, buying and selling stuff. And then as you get into servants and the untouchables, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of money taking place at that point. If Heath is an untouchable, he's not going to marry up into a noble family. He's going to, marry another untouchable or not marry at all. But it's okay, Heath, because your soul will continue to live beyond your untouchable state.
I was gonna say, do people marry outside of outside of closely related castes, and then what with their children?
It would not be like a sanctioned marriage for it to be outside the caste. Most marriages would still be arranged at this point. So a merchant's going to marry another merchant. The kids will therefore be merchants. If you have a servant marrying a noble, you were basically going to be living outside of this whole culture realm where it wouldn't matter. But you would not go to a wedding as a nobleman and see a fellow nobleman marry a servant girl, or vice versa, a noble woman marrying a servant, because that's not going to happen. Now, especially within the time frame that we're looking at, in today's world, these still exist. Certainly, those lines are becoming more and more blurred as to what it would have been 2,000 years ago. Today, could you have and really in India, you have more of a middle class now than they ever have before, so those lines have certainly been blurred. But within the realm of what we're looking at, merchant marries a merchant, noble marries a noble, so on and so forth.
Were those priests allowed to veil out of marriage?
Yes. Some did not, but you could. Siddhartha is the son of a priest, and the plan is that he will become a priest as well. His family's pretty well-to-do, but again, it's not a guarantee that you necessarily would. Now, you could be a wealthy Brahmin, and you could marry a poor Brahmin, and that would be okay because it's within the caste. How often that would happen, though, I doubt, on a regular basis.
Were the Brahmins only allowed to be men?
The Brahmins would only be the teachers. Yes. Now, if you could be born into the Brahmin caste as a female, but you're not going to become a teacher. But you would marry a fellow Brahmin, and your child, like say you end up having a son, he could end up becoming a teacher. But it's still very gender specific, where pretty much you're talking about the males are the ones doing this, doing that. It's more of kings. You could be successful female, but that's going to be more within the merchant kind of category with some special circumstances probably happening. The Upanishads, I just like saying the word, it's fun. Upanishads. Starting around 7th century BCE, so we're still going back, quite a ways. These are ancient texts, and it would be a series of texts. It's not like all the Upanishads are written in the 7th century BCE, but this is when you start getting texts that are now explaining the Vedas. So it's more of kind of an analysis and interpretation of these hymns and prayers that have been around for a while. So here is where you get into specifics about, the universal soul, various deities depending upon where the Upanishads are coming from. The idea about karma, fate, reincarnation, all of those things. So this becomes, in some ways, it's a sacred text. I wouldn't necessarily look at it as being like a Bible, as some would say, as like the Word of God kind of thing. It's understood that it is analysis, interpretation of religious ideas, but a lot of people use these as the basis for their understanding of Hindu culture. But you'll have various Upanishads throughout. Like number 3, you see a certain type of Upanishad, which I'm not even going to butcher the pronunciation, but they can get a name based on location of where it was written, culture, and then also kind of date that would be taking place with it. But they would tend to be having similar stories that would be happening. Other texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita, tells you more about the story of creation, and we'll get into various deities and forms and all that kind of stuff as well. As long as you know that to live is to suffer, you will be okay. And as a junior in high school, I think you've come to accept that to live is to suffer. So Grant, what does it mean to live? Okay, you're fine. You got this. No problems. All right, Buddhism. This is where things get confusing because you got a guy named Siddhartha, and you have various spellings of his name. Siddhartha Gautama. For you, it's going to be, I think it's Gautam. Another version of the text has AMA. Others have a totally different spelling that would be taking place. But he is Hindu. He's with a noble family. His father is king. He breaks free from Hindu culture and starts his own kind of belief system, which is Buddhism. Buddha is the illustrious one. So if you're a Buddhist, you follow the Buddha. He is not claiming to be a god. He doesn't argue or believe that there are any gods. But he's simply looking at a way to break free from the idea that to live is to suffer. So he's trying to transcend this idea. The hope of a Hindu, as well as a Buddhist, is to attain nirvana, which is basically peace of mind. And so the Buddha claims that he has reached that level where he is at peace, content at all times. He's not saying he's a god. He's not saying come and worship me and bless me. But he is kind of giving teachings as to how to try to attain nirvana. It gets a little confusing because Siddhartha and the Buddha cross paths in the 3rd chapter. But it's not that you're going to be going back and forth between which Siddhartha are we talking about. The hope is that you can attain nirvana, meaning nothingness, in the sense that you are escaping from this cycle of endless rebirths. Again, this is going to be with your overall soul is not going to have to kind of keep coming back, where you are trying to attain nirvana. While your human vessel may cease to exist after 85 years, your soul is still going to be in a rightful, peaceful kind of place. There's a lot of differences, but the main difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is that Buddhism offers its followers a code for living, as well as a promise of eternal salvation, protection from harm. So if you go about doing this, you will ultimately get to that place. The tough thing is getting to that place, because the path that Megan takes to get there could be different from the path that Medina has to take there and the path that Emma takes to get there. Emma?
So the people who did they really convert to Judaism as opposed to the lower caste people?
It mixed. It would be some Brahmins, some nobles, some merchants, some from the untouchables, and you again, like Eno was kind of talking about male, female. There would be female followers, but it was primarily males who become priests, so to speak, for lack of a better word. But yeah, it could be from all castes. More often than not, it kind of starts off as being more of a wealthier group. You're still giving up the luxuries of life and whatnot, but these are the folks, or at least it would be assumed it would be the nobles and the Brahmins, who are going to have more of this philosophical debate into their head about attaining nirvana and things like that, where if you're an untouchable, if you're a sharecropper, you're worried about surviving and feeding the family and moving on, so such thoughts aren't really going to bother you quite as much, but it would be more of an intellectual crowd initially. Now, it does certainly matriculate its way into being all groups of people, walks of life. But I'd say you're probably starting with more higher caste folks who are kind of considering theological, philosophical questions. What does it mean to live and survive and to exist? As opposed to, I need to plant some corn. You're right, so we can feed things. Folders, if you need to take home to look at it, you can. Otherwise, you can drop them off in the bin on your way out the door. Tomorrow, literary term views, and then we'll finish going over some things with Siddhartha.
I don't know why we had a problem.
See that? Been a long time looking. Considering the main things is the range of evidence was a little more diverse here. I'd have to look at it again. We can talk about it, as to what would be other examples that you could put in, but I can't tell you. Well, and that's, because you're doing it as quickly as you can without knowing, hey, I'm going to write about this part and then that part.